PMHMP certification review by Lillian Obervon. The Drug Enforcement Agency (DEA) has established a controlled substance schedule determining the addiction and abuse potential of certain drugs, which may or may not be prescribed by the nurse practitioner, depending upon the specific regulation established by the state issuing the MP license to practice. Schedule 1 drug contain drug for which there is no acceptable medical use in the United States due to the high potential for addiction and abuse, and such drugs include LSD, heroin, MSDM, and Peyton, PEYOTE. Schedule 11N drugs are those drugs which are considered non-narcotic. Schedule 11N drugs are those drugs which are considered non-narcotic and have the potential for high level of abuse, with severe potential for both physical and psychic dependence. Example of Schedule 11N drugs include amphetamine and methamphetamine. I repeat, Schedule 11N drugs are those drugs which are considered non-narcotic and have the potential for high level of abuse, with severe potential for both physical and psych dependence. Example of Schedule 11N drugs include amphetamine and methamphetamine. Schedule 3 drugs are those drugs which have lower abuse and addiction potential than those drugs included in Schedule 1 and 2. Schedule 3 drugs are those drugs which have lower abuse and addiction potentials than those drugs included in Schedule 1 and 2, but that also contain limited quantity of the same narcotic or non-narcotic components as those drugs included in Schedule 1 and 2. Example of Schedule 3 drugs include acetaminophen with codeine, must contain less than 90 mg of codeine per dosage unit, and buprenorphine, buprenorphine. Schedule 3 drugs are those drugs which have lower abuse and addiction potentials than those drugs included in Schedule 1 and 2, but that also contain limited quantity of the same narcotic or non-narcotic component as those drugs included in Schedule 1 and 2. Example of Schedule 3 drugs include acetaminophen with codeine, must contain less than 90 mg of codeine per dosage unit, and bupropion, buprenorphine. There is no Schedule IN1N. Okay, that's it on the medications for now. A patient's a patient's right to refuse treatment is a legal doctrine that applies to all persons except during emergency. An emergency is defined as a condition in clinical practice that require immediate intervention in order to prevent death or serious harm to either the patient or another person. In 1981, the case of Roger versus O'Kane determined that patients have an absolute right to refuse treatment, but a guardian may authorize their treatment. I repeat, a patient's right to refuse treatment is a legal doctrine that applies to all persons except during emergencies. An emergency is defined as a condition in clinical practice that requires immediate intervention in order to prevent death or serious harm to either the patient or another person. In 1981, the case of Roger versus O'Kane determined that patients have an absolute right to refuse treatment, but a guardian may authorize their treatment. In 1976, case of O'Connor versus Donaldson ruled that human mentally ill patients, I repeat, the 1976 case of O'Connor versus Donaldson ruled that harmless mentally ill patients cannot be confined against their will if they can survive outside. This case determined that the presence of a mental illness alone cannot justify involuntary hospitalization. I'm going to repeat the case of O'Connor versus Donaldson again. The 1976 case of O'Connor versus Donaldson ruled that harmless mentally ill patients cannot be confined against their will if they can survive outside. This case determined that the presence of a mental illness alone cannot justify involuntary hospitalization. In 1979, Rennie versus Klein determined that patients have the right to refuse any treatment and use an appeal process. I repeat, in 1979, the case of Rennie versus Klein determined that patients have the right to refuse any treatment and use an appeal process. Durham versus United States determined that an individual is not criminally responsible if the unlawful act was the product of mental illness. This case is known for originally the insanity defense. I'm going to repeat this again. The insanity defense was originated due to Durham versus United States that determined that individuals are not criminally responsible if the unlawful act was the product of mental illness. To simplify, this simply means that when a mentally ill individual commits an unlawful act, he or she will not be held responsible. And this case came about because of Durham versus the United States. Durham, Durham, Durham versus United States determined that an individual is not criminally responsible if the unlawful act was the product of mental illness. This case is known for originally the insanity defense case. Durham versus United States. Okay, now I'm going to talk about phobia. Social phobia is commonly seen in Japan and Korea. Social phobia is commonly seen in Japan and Korean people. The syndrome of Tajin Koyofusho is a form of social phobia. In the culture of Japanese and Korea, the syndrome of Tajin Koyofusho is a form of social phobia. It is characterized by a fear of social evaluation. The patient often report that they believe they are making other people uncomfortable. For example, a patient might state, "My gaze upset people, so they avoid me." This fear also has some trait of body dysmorphia disorder, in that the patient may believe they possess an offensive body odor and it can accelerate to a delusional insanity. And it can accelerate to delusional insanity. Okay. Commonly seen in Japan and Korea is a social phobia, the syndrome of which is considered the syndrome of Tajin Koyofusho is a form of social phobia that is characterized by a fear of social evaluation. Social phobia of social evaluation. The patient often report that they believe they are making other people uncomfortable. For example, a patient might state, "My gaze upset people, so they avoid me." This fear also has some traits of body dysmorphia disorder, in that the patient may believe they possess an offensive body odor, and it can accelerate to a delusional insanity. Okay, moving on. Knowledge, according to the strength of information they provide, which series currently rank item from the strongest to the weakest. Knowledge, according to the strength of information they provide. Assessing knowledge according to the strength of information they provide. Which of the following series currently rank item from the strongest to the weakest? This is talking about research. Research knowledge according to the strength of information they provide. Which series correctly ranked item from the strongest to the weakest? 1. Single randomized controlled trial. Opinion of authorities. Single descriptive study. Single randomized controlled trial that it includes opinion of authorities, single descriptive study. The next is second strongest is systemic review of non-randomized trial, single correctional study, single randomized control trial. Systemic review of randomized trial, single correctional study, single randomized control trial. Then the next is meta-analysis. Meta-analysis, single randomized control trial, single descriptive trial. Opinion of authority, single control trial, single randomized control trial. Explanation. Okay. Everything that I just said, let's scratch that out. Let's do it again. Knowledge according to the strength of information they provide, which series correctly rank items from the strongest to the weakest. From the strongest to the weakest. The strongest level is meta-analysis, single randomized controlled trial, single descriptive study. Meta-analysis, which contains single control. Level 1, systemic review of randomized control trial or systemic review of non-randomized control trial. Level 2, so the level according to strongest to the weakest. Level 1, which is the strongest, systemic review of randomized control trial or systemic review of non-randomized control trial. Level 2 is single randomized control trial or single non-randomized. Level 3 is systemic review of correctional or observational study. Level 3, systemic review of correctional or observational study. Level 4, single correctional or observational study. Level 5, systemic review of descriptive, qualitative, or physiologic study. Level 6, single descriptive, qualitative, or physiologic study. Level 7, which is the weakest, opinion of authorities and experts. So I'm going to read this again. Research knowledge according to the strength of information they provide are grouped from the strongest to the grouping it from the strongest to the lowest. So the evidence hierarchy ranks sources of knowledge. Evidence-based practice demand the use of best knowledge. Okay. Evidence-based practice demand the use of best knowledge. The evidence hierarchy ranks sources of knowledge according to the strength of information they provide. The evidence hierarchy ranks sources. The evidence hierarchy ranks sources of knowledge according to the strength of information they provide. The best evidence comes from level 1 of the evidence hierarchy, which include meta-analysis. So pretty much this is trying to explain that evidence-based practice kind of place things in a hierarchy. So the hierarchy rank it from level 1 to level 7, which level 1 is the strongest and the highest. So pretty much evidence-based practice demand the use of the best knowledge in the form of hierarchy ranking. So the hierarchy goes like this. Level 1 is the strongest, and that level 1 is known as systemic review of randomized controlled trial or systemic review of non-randomized controlled trial. That's level 1. Level 2, single randomized controlled trial or single non-randomized trial. Level 2, I repeat, consists of single randomized controlled trial or single non-randomized trial. Level 3, systemic review of correlational or observational study. Level 3, systemic review of correlational or observational study. Level 4, single correlational or observational study. Level 4, single correlational. Level 4, single correlational or observable study. Level 5, systemic review of descriptive, qualitative, or physiologic study. Level 5, systemic review of descriptive, qualitative, or physiologic study. Level 6, single descriptive, qualitative, or physiologic study. Level 6, single descriptive, qualitative, or physiologic study. Level 7 is the weakest, which talked about opinion of authorities and expert committee. Level 7 is the last and the weakest. Opinion of authorities and expert committee. Level 7, which is the weakest, consists of opinion of authority and expert committee. Okay, when assessing delirium in a patient, the following can be put into consideration. D. This is just assessment mnemonic for delirium. Assessment mnemonic for delirium. D for the drug. E. Electrolyte abnormality. L. Low energy saturation. I. Infection. Arrow. Reduced sensory input. I. Intracranial. U. Urinary or renal retention. M. Myocardial. When the mnemonic for assessing delirium in a patient. The mnemonic for assessing delirium in a patient is, delirium. Delirium is DELIRIUM. So the D in delirium is drug. E in delirium is electrolyte abnormality. L. Low energy. I. Infection. Arrow. Reduced sensory input. I. Intracranial. U. Urinary or renal retention. M. Myocardial. So the mnemonic for assessing delirium: D for the drug. E. Electrolyte abnormality. L. Low oxygen saturation. I. Infection. Arrow. Reduced sensory input. I. Intracranial. The second I is for intracranial. U is for urinary retention or urinary or renal retention, and M is for myocardial. There you have the mnemonic for assessing delirium in a patient. Now let's talk about selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, which is SSRIs. The exact mechanism of action of serotonin. The exact mechanism of action of selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, remains unclear. Acutely, they inhibit serotonin reuptake pumps, thus increasing the amount of available serotonin in the synapse. However, patients typically do not experience symptomatic relief for several weeks. Some research demonstrate that the delayed therapeutic effects are due to a down regulation of postsynaptic 5-HT2 receptor sites. I'm going to explain this again because this SSRI is a very interesting and broad topic. The exact mechanism of action of selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRI, remains unclear. Acutely, they inhibit serotonin reuptake pump, thus increasing the amount of available serotonin in the synapse. However, patients typically do not experience symptomatic relief for several weeks. Some research demonstrates that the delayed therapeutic effects are due to down regulation of postsynaptic 5-TH2. No, 5-HT2. TH didn't sound right. 5-HT2 receptor site. So patients typically do not experience symptomatic relief for several weeks. This is talking about when you take SSRI, you don't start feeling the effect until at least 4 to 6 weeks before you start feeling it. This is because, according to some research, it is delayed due to a down regulation of postsynaptic 5-HT2 receptor, because to take it down there, because it takes a while. It takes that 4 to 6 weeks for it to take it downward to the regulation of postsynaptic sites of the 5-HT2 receptor site. Receptor site. Okay. Okay, that's it on that. Oh, increase mitochondrial serotonin and up regulation of postsynaptic 5-H2 receptor site are incorrect. Okay. Don't have to worry about this one. The general function of norepinephrine involve alertness. So now we're talking about the neurotransmitters. The general function of norepinephrine involve alertness, orientation, flight or fight, learning, memory, and focus and attention. Norepinephrine is responsible for alertness, orientation, flight or fight, learning, memory, and focus. Norepinephrine responsible for orientation, flight of hydrates, fight or fight, learning, memory, alertness, and focus and attention. The general function of norepinephrine include alertness, orientation, flight or fight, learning, memory, and focus and attention. The general function of serotonin involve regulation of sleep, pain perception, mood states, temperature, aggression, and libido. Who knew that serotonin would be causing aggression and it causing sleep? So I'm going to say that again about serotonin. The general function of serotonin involve or include regulation of sleep, pain perception, mood states, temperature, aggression, and libido. Moving on to glutamine. The general function of glutamine include memory and sustained autonomic function. The general function of dopamine. The general function of glutamine, let's go back again. The general function of glutamine involve memory and sustained autonomic function. Moving on to dopamine. The general function of dopamine involve normal functioning of thinking, decision making, reward seeking behavior, fine muscle action, and integrated cognition. So let's go back to the 4 neurotransmitters. There are the 4 major neurotransmitters are norepinephrine, serotonin, glutamine, and dopamine. So I'm going to reverse it again. I'm going to say it again. The 4 neurotransmitters, the four major neurotransmitters are norepinephrine, serotonin, glutamine, and the dopamine. Norepinephrine is responsible for alertness, orientation, fight or flight, learning, memory, focus, and attention. I'm going to repeat this again because these neurotransmitters are very, very high here when it comes to neurotransmitter have very, very high yield when it comes to this PMHMP board certification. So I'm going to repeat these 4 major neurotransmitters function again. The 4 major neurotransmitters are, we have the dopamine, we have the serotonin, we have the glutamine, and norepinephrine. So I'm going to repeat that again. We have the dopamine, serotonin, glutamine, and norepinephrine. So the major functions are as follow. The dopamine is responsible for normal functioning of thinking, decision making, reward seeking behavior, fine muscle action, and integrated cognitions. Thinking, fine muscle action, reward seeking behavior. So Number two is serotonin. Serotonin is involved in regulation of sleep, pain perception, mood states, temperature, aggression, and libido. Serotonin is involved in the regulation of sleep, pain perception. Serotonin is involved in regulation of sleep, pain perception, mood states, temperature, aggression, and libido. Moving on to number three. The third neurotransmitter is glutamine. Glutamine involved in memory and sustained autonomic function. So glutamine is involved in memory and sustained autonomic function. And then the last one is the norepinephrine, that is involved in alertness, orientation, fight or flight, learning, memory, and focus and attention. The function of norepinephrine, which is the fourth neurotransmitter, include alertness, orientation, fight or flight idea, learning, memory, function, and attention. So norepinephrine, alertness, focus, attention, learning, and memory. Dopamine, thinking, fine motor action, and reward seeking behavior. Dopamine, thinking, so GABA. The neurotransmitters are matched with their correct functions below. Norepinephrine, alertness, focus, attention, learning, and memory. Dopamine, thinking, fine motor action, and reward seeking behavior. Serotonin regulates sleep, pain, mood, state, and temperature. So serotonin Serotonin is not aggression. Okay, now let's do this again. The 4 neurotransmitter. The 4 neurotransmitter. The neurotransmitters are matched with their correct functions below. Norepinephrine. Norepinephrine involves alertness, focused attention, learning, and memory. Dopamine involves thinking, fine muscle action, and reward thinking and reward seeking behavior. GABA involve reduce arousal, aggression, and anxiety. GABA involved reduce arousal, aggression, and anxiety. Serotonin regulates sleep, pain, mood states, and temperature. So serotonin has something to do with aggression. The general function of dopamine include function of thinking, decision making, reward seeking behavior, fine muscle action, and integrated cognition. Dopamine irregularities are closely linked to the disease process such as schizophrenia. So the general function of dopamine include the general function of dopamine involve normal functioning of thinking, decision making, reward seeking behavior, fine muscle action, and integrated cognition. Dopamine irregularities are closely linked to disease such as schizophrenia. Let's move on to norepinephrine. The general function of norepinephrine involve alertness, orientation, fight or flight, learning, memory, focus, and attention. Norepinephrine irregularities are closely linked to disease process such as panic disorder and anxiety. So the irregularity of norepinephrine can lead to panic and anxiety disorder. The general function of serotonin involve regulation of sleep, pain perception, mood states, temperature, aggression, and libido. Serotonin irregularities are closely linked to depressive disorder. Okay, so I'm going to talk about serotonin again. The general function of serotonin involve regulation of sleep, pain perception, mood states, temperature, aggression, and libido. Serotonin irregularity is linked to depressive disorder. So that's it on serotonin. Now let's move on to glutamine. The general function of glutamine involves memory and sustained autonomic function. Memory and autonomic function. Glutamine irregularity are closely linked to bipolar type disorders. The function of glutamine involve memory and sustained autonomic function. Glutamine irregularities are closely linked to bipolar type disorders. So there are 4 major neurotransmitters. We have the dopamine, we have the serotonin, we have the norepinephrine, and then the last one is the GABA. The dopamine, the norepinephrine, serotonin, and glutamine. So the glutamate are building that the glutamate is the same thing as the GABA. The GABA, okay. This neurotransmitter. So let's talk about the brain. Brain tissue is categorized as either white matter or gray matter. Brain tissue is categorized as either white matter or gray matter. Brain tissue is categorized as either white matter or gray matter. White matter is the myelinated axon. White matter is the myelinated axons of neurons. White matter is the myelinated axon of neurons, while the gray matter is composed of nerve cells, body, and dendrites. Gray matter is found in the working area of the brain and contains the synapses. Gray matter is found in the working area of the brain and contains the synapses. Synapses. Let's talk about the brain again. Brain tissue is categorized as either white matter or gray matter. White matter is the myelinated axons of neurons, The white matter is the myelinated axon of neurons. Gray matter is composed of nerve cell bodies and dendrites. Gray matter is found in working area of the brain and contains synapses. White matter is the myelinated axons of the neurons, whereas the gray matter is composed of nerves, cell bodies, and dendrites, and it is found in the working area of the brain and contains the synapses. Okay. SSRI again. SSRI and TCAs have been shown to be effective in reducing the frequency of binge eating and purging disorder, but not anorexia nervosa. Eating disorder, the eating disorder anorexia nervosa. The first line of treatment for anorexia nervosa is psychotherapy. The first line of treatment for anorexia nervosa is psychotherapy. Medication management is to be adjunct to psychotherapy. So the first line of treatment is psychotherapy, that you can use medication as an adjunct treatment. There is no FDA recommendation medication for treating anorexia nervosa. So the first line of treatment for anorexia nervosa is psychotherapy, but when need be, you can use medication as treatment, although there is no FDA approved medication to treat anorexia nervosa. First line of treatment for anorexia nervosa is psychotherapy. Medication management is to be adjunct to psychotherapy. There is no recommendation by the FDA specifically with regard to medication to treat anorexia nervosa. Okay, that's it on that. SSRI and TCH have been shown to be effective in reducing the frequency of binge eating and purging disorder, but not anorexia nervosa. So even though you can use SSRI and TCAs for eating disorder, it is only recommended for binge eating and purging disorder. Binge eating and purging disorder, but not for management of anorexia nervosa. Okay, I will stop here for now, and I will continue in the next. I want to be doing it one hour each, and I'll continue in the next one.